everyone. Good to see everyone. And pretty much know almost everyone here. And Daryl's been nice enough to bring us out the race course, which, yeah, let's put it on the whiteboard, which we all know already, I'm sure, because we've seen it on the internet. And but we'll go through it piece by piece. The plan tonight was to keep this as informal and fun as possible, keep it in the tradition of a pub night. So if anyone has any questions as we go through this, just raise your hand and we'll try and deal with it straight away as opposed to doing it in the end. Being 2 weeks out, as of today or as of this morning, a little bit difficult for me to predict what kind of wind we're going to have. I will say that there's a few scenarios that we'll have to make sure that we have sorted out. It most likely will be fairly cold, especially the water. And it will get dark at night. You will need insurance. And so now we've covered all that part off. We'll go on to the stuff that we need to know for this year's race. I'm trying to think, how many skippers do we have here tonight? Wow, we got a lot of skippers. I think that's more than we have on the website for entries. And the rest of us are crew. That's good. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about building our race strategy. And I can always send any of these or all of these to you guys in an email if you like. But some of these links are websites to areas that you can find some information on weather. And a lot of it can go on your iPad or iPhone. And some of these models are a lot better than some of the other models. And I'll tell you why. Is generally a low resolution model will not deal with geography. So, and that's very important obviously for where we sail around here. So best to look at, Doug's been helping me out a bit here, Doug Wardrop, numerous Southern Straits winner. Which one would you prefer out of all of those?
Oh, they're always great.
Predict Wind is good.
Yeah. No, Predict Wind because they're a sponsor for one thing. And,
yep, they're a sponsor.
Yeah, and their models are fabulous because I look at this stuff all the time.
Huh. So Predict Wind is one good one. The ones from the University of Washington, which you can see in the middle there. If you Google those guys, they've got some pretty good models, and it's always being updated. And so I think as we're getting closer to the race, keep an eye on those. And when we look at the Environment Canada website, it's got their typical predictions for what's going to be happening in the next 12 and 24 hours, and then there's a general outlook. But how they do it, they're looking at a whole bunch of things. A lot of those things that they're looking at are based on what these are based on. And so for me, if I was a week away from the race and say we were going to be starting next Friday, I'd probably be looking at what I would call the 500 millibar forecast. And the 500 millibar forecast is the sort of winds aloft, or what they call on TV the jet stream. And that gives you an idea in the long term where the fronts are going to be coming from. So at that point I could sort of say, well, it's probably going to be a little bit warm, maybe it's a Pineapple Express, or there's a chance of something coming from the Gulf of Alaska and could come through quite quickly, and maybe we'll get a strong southeasterly, and it'll be switching quickly to a northwesterly, quite strong after that, and probably quite light in between. So that would probably be my week out forecast, and that would obviously go in line with what someone like Environment Canada or the Weather Network would be telling you on the TV. And then as we get closer, start looking at the models that are 5-day and 7-day, and then just start homing in on them. And then in the 48 hours before the race, I think you should be just concentrating on the ones that have the high resolution. And so then you're going, at that point you're going to more of the predict wind types or the University of Washington types. And obviously looking at all the other ones that you normally look at, Environment Canada and that sort of thing. And by that point you're going to have a pretty good idea of what the situation is going to be. The tactics for the race, you know, sometimes can be fairly simple. If it's a southeasterly from start to finish, or it's a westerly from start to finish. But it's when the fronts are passing or even stalling that it gets a little bit more complicated, and then we can go through a transition where the wind goes from the east to the southeast, maybe even to the southwest for a while, or just stop altogether and then come through from the northwest. And that's a common pattern, and how quickly that pattern happens can really affect the race, and hopefully it doesn't happen when we're out there.
You came from the north last night, or last year.
Came from the north, yeah. So let's go do what we should do first, start the race. The Take 45 is, this is the 45th edition of the Southern Straits Race, in case you're wondering. So we are, well, we're here, but we're going to be starting over here. And this picture's not the best, but what it does show is you can see the clearer water flowing through on an ebb towards Point Atkinson. This photo courtesy of Doug here. And then you can also see the Fraser River water that with every flood tide bends around the university and into the bay, and it's just kind of meandering back and forth. So our goal at the start is almost the same every year, no matter which breeze direction is we've got such a strong current that's coming out through First Narrows, and the starting line is on the West Van side of it, and even where the tugboat is, doesn't quite get there, that we've got to, maybe not right away after the start, depending on the wind angle and how favored the line is, but we have to get out into that tide conveyor belt and get us towards Point Atkinson. And everything being equal, and it doesn't take us too long to get to Point Atkinson, we're going to have an ebb tide, which I'll show you in a minute here, when we get to Point Atkinson. And obviously with an ebb tide, we're going to have a different situation where the ebb is going to be exiting Howe Sound, or if we get that far, Collingwood Channel. And then in the strait, the flood comes from the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the ebb goes towards the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So the ebb will actually be adverse for us if we're heading towards Entrance Island, Bolinas Island, or Sisters. So where it gets a little bit interesting as we go past Point Atkinson is we want to play the little back eddies which exist. There's some, not all the time, but a lot of the time that exist as they come around Owen Island here, and it's obviously on the way that we want to go before we get hit on the face with the ebb coming down the Strait of Georgia. And then again, on this side of the bay, there could be a strong ebb coming out of Falls Creek, believe it or not, but it quickly hits you in the face on the other side, so you have to be prepared for that. So let's look at the times for the tides. So for those of you in the back that brought your binoculars, things we have to remember are maximum ebb 11:18 in the morning. So you know, hopefully we'll be started our race by then, and this is obviously right at the bridge, but it's 4.6 knots, and this is all the First Narrows. And then as we get further through the day, we're going to see the same situation over and over again through the next day. And how does that affect us as we go around the course? You guys see that in the back okay? So let's just generalize that, because that's easier. If you get in a discussion on deck with your crew, you can just sound a little bit more like an expert. Just say, well, it's this, and tell them to keep sailing the boat in a straight line and put a few more ice cubes in your drink. So you can see on the, what we call the mainland side, the tide changes a little bit earlier. The whole wave, I guess you could call it, of the tide change happens, and this is all relative to First Narrows, happens a little bit sooner than it does on the other side. So not a big difference, but certainly happens just a tiny bit sooner. So the nice thing is we can take those times from the original page or the previous page, and we can use them for the rest of the race, and just know that between 10 and 20 minutes is going to be more or less the same time for all the changes. Back to the start. Nice little photo courtesy of Doug here. So how do we get a good start? We want to get a really good start in the Straits race, and one thing that's going to be fixed and probably isn't going to change is once that big tugboat rolls out to the start line, that angle between it and the pier is going to be more or less fixed. So whether that's square to Point Atkinson, because that's more or less where we're going to end up, it's not really of too much consequence, because remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a good start, but not just a good start for the cameras, we're trying to get a good start for where we want to go in our strategy in the race. So the first important thing is not to get caught in so much traffic that we can't execute our game plan. So here's what we know. No matter, we don't know what the wind is going to be blowing, but we know that there's that current line out there, and we want to somehow be able to maneuver our boat and get out to that current line. So we've got two options. One is to start right near the committee boat, and in this case it's a bit of an easterly or maybe even a northeasterly, and the boats are putting their spinnakers up, and then they're most likely jibing and heading out a little bit, maybe half a mile, and then jibing back so they're in the conveyor belt. And if it's a westerly, same thing. Maybe we don't want to start down towards Dundee, maybe we want to start a little bit towards the committee boat and be able to tack. Well, we've got to imagine that, you know, almost everyone has the same idea. So this is where we've got to be careful. So we don't want to get stuck in a situation where we're early at the committee boat and there's a big bunch of boats that are all fighting the current. And when I say fighting the current's actually pushing us towards the line, but if we're getting there too soon, then all of a sudden we're fighting against it. And if it's a downwind start, it's even worse, because all the boats to leeward of us are the leeward boats and we're the windward boat, and we're in a bit of a compromised situation there. So my suggestion would be, make sure you have a good idea of where the line is, and when I say where the line is, where an actual line sight is. And obviously it's difficult to get a line sight facing towards West Vancouver because there's the restaurant formerly known as Pepe's, I don't know what it's called, and all those other places there.
For you guys that don't know about that, I wouldn't ask.
Yeah.